In this episode, we will deal with the crucial 1994 election, South Africa's first fully representative election. Now, FW de Klerk, in the run-up to the elections, you'd been dealing with multiple national crises, with the AWB's invasion of Bophuthatswana, with the Vlakplaas scandal, with the whole process of trying to get the IFP on board before the final election. But at the same time, you had to fight an election campaign, perhaps the most important election campaign of your career. Can you tell us about that campaign and what were you offering the voters?
I had to cut myself into many pieces to attend to the crises to which you referred in your question, and to run and develop a campaign and run a campaign. In the campaign, we contrasted ourselves with the ANC. We put forward the policies and the values in which we believe. And we targeted, together with our advisors, we targeted the whole electorate. By then, the National Party was a multinational party. It had white supporters, colored supporters, black supporters, Indian supporters. So we addressed them all. And in the campaign itself, we held meetings and walkabouts amongst them all. We fought an election on the basis of values, principles, and inclusiveness.
So this was the first multiracial election that the National Party had fought. What sort of reception did you get from colored and Indian and black voters who were previously opponents of the National Party, who previously had been victims of apartheid?
I actually got a very warm reception. In the results of the election proved it. The results showed that more than 50% of the coloreds voted for the National Party, more than 50% of the Indians, more than 50% of the whites, and about 500,000 to 600,000 blacks voted for the National Party. But the 2nd February speech was still alive in the minds and hearts of my opponents also. And therefore, I rarely experienced an inimical reception. Even those who in the end wouldn't vote for the National Party was warm and friendly.
And on the 14th of April, South Africa had something quite new in its political history, and that was a presidential TV debate. You had a debate with Nelson Mandela, the candidate of the ANC. Can you tell us something about that TV debate and how that went off?
It was quite a debate. I knew from experience that you can't get a knockout in a debate. The best you can do is to win on points. And I went into the debate not with a view to give Mr. Mandela a knockout, but to win on points. We were, I think, both well prepared. In the beginning, he was quite aggressive, and I was scoring points. And towards the end of it, I started to believe I'm winning on points. And then he did something out of the ordinary. He suddenly leant across and took my hand and said words to the effect that we'll work together, and he reached out to me on a very personal level. There my points went, and I think it was a draw.
As it happened, the election produced a result with the ANC winning 62% of the vote, not a two-thirds majority. The National Party won 20.4%, and the IFP won 10.5%. What did you think of the result? Is this what you were expecting? Did you think the election was free and fair?
I was working for a better result. I, from the beginning, believed we could get 30. And as the polls closed, I believed we might have got 30. But evidence came to the fore that there was a lot of malpractice. Some of it was even humorous. In one distant, in the rural areas of the then Transvaal, there was a polling booth, and a black man went in and said, "I want to vote." And they said, "Who are you voting for?" He said, "FW de Klerk." They said, no, this is Nelson Mandela's voting booth. Go elsewhere." So there were a lot of irregularities. In the platteland, in the rural areas of the Eastern Cape, for instance, many boxes, when they were opened, all the votes were for the ANC, and they were all neatly stacked. Not as you throw it through the opening at the top of a polling booth. So we could have attacked the validity of the election. But after consultation, I decided not to attack it. Because in the end, very important was that they did not get a 2/3 majority. Very important was that we did turn out to be clearly the second biggest party. And thirdly, the net result was that the government of national unity could start and we could get off the ground. By and large, therefore, on the balance of probabilities, I decided not to contest, but to concede.
And you made your concession speech, I think, on the 3rd of May. What did that feel like? What did you feel when you made that concession speech?
It was quite emotional. There was an element of sadness, yes. But there was also an element of satisfaction. The election went peacefully. For that I was deeply thankful. The results were, by and large, acceptable. And we made a good start with this election. I had hope for the future. But that I became emotional, there's no doubt about that. It was the end of my career of running the country. After so many decades in cabinet, I was coming to the end of my political career. I realized that. And therefore, there was, on a personal level, some sadness.
And now all of this perhaps reached its climax on the 10th of May with President Mandela's inauguration in the amphitheatre of the Union Buildings. The Union Buildings that had been the seat of white power since Union. And here you were in the Union Buildings listening to the inauguration of Nelson Mandela as President of South Africa. There were guests from all over the world present. I think Castro was there, Prince Philip from the United Kingdom, Al Gore from the United States. What did it feel like? What emotions were going through your mind when that historic occasion took place? And aircraft from the SAAF flew over the Union Buildings at a critical point.
By then I had worked through my disappointment about the election results. And I felt a sense of achievement. In the transitional constitution, in the 34 immutable principles, we have achieved most of the goals we have set for ourselves and which were inherent in my speech of the 2nd of February, 1990. I felt a sense of achievement that we achieved it in a peaceful manner, notwithstanding the violence which accompanied the whole negotiation process. It was relatively peaceful. Negotiations succeeded. And there was a new South Africa. And there was the hope and the chance for building a truly successful, wonderful, non-racial country. So I was at peace, and I had a sense of achievement.
And I think a very important aspect of that was that in your mind, you were not handing power to the ANC. You were handing power to a new constitutional dispensation. The ANC would be the guardians of that as the elected government, but you were handing power not to a political party, but to a new constitutional system.
Absolutely. The greatest achievement we had in the negotiations was to ensure that we become a constitutional state. With a constitutional court, with the Constitution being the highest law in the land, with the Constitutional Court even having jurisdiction over government and parliamentarian decisions. So yes, I did not hand over power to the ANC for the time being. In a democracy, yes. But there was a government of national unity for 5 years. And most importantly, they were limited in their power. The Constitution stood above everything.
And then you embarked with the ANC and with the IFP in the government of national unity. Any party that achieved more than 5% in support in the election was entitled to representation in the government of national unity. You were entitled to appointment as one of 2 deputy presidents. The National Party was given 6 portfolios in the 27-member cabinet, and the IFP was given 3. How did it work? How did you find the operation of the government of national unity? And I suppose it must have differed very fundamentally from your experience before the transition.
No, absolutely. First, we had to negotiate. I had the power to decide who the 6 individuals would be. We had to negotiate between us, me and Buthelezi and President Mandela, on which portfolios we got. The number was not negotiable, it was proportional. Who is appointed in each portfolio of my 6 was my privilege, not to be negotiated. But which portfolios we got was to be negotiated. We wanted 1 minister at least in each of the 3 main disciplines: security, socio-economic affairs, and economic and finance. The ANC made it clear from the beginning they would not give a portfolio in security to us. The compromise was I became chairman of the Security Cabinet Committee. I appointed my 6. Buthelezi appointed his 3, himself and 2 others. And then we started with the GNU. We were a different type of coalition than a typical coalition. Normally coalitions is formed where no party has a clear majority. In this case, it was a sort of an artificial coalition. But we tried to make it work. In the beginning, it worked well. They realized they did not have any experience of government. They listened to me and my fellow cabinet ministers from the National Party. They took over our cabinet committee system, how minutes were held, how memorandums had to be submitted, all that. I think to this day, more or less, they adhere to the same practices. It worked well for a year or a year and a half. Then the trouble started.
Well, one of the problems was that there was no coalition agreement. In any coalition, the starting point is an agreement between the parties on broad policy questions. But the ANC refused to enter into such an agreement. And the other problem was that the ministers that were appointed from non-ANC parties had actually very little power or control of the portfolios to which they were allocated. Is that correct?
The ANC used its majority. It tried often to steamroller things through. As I say, in the first year to 18 months, they were accommodating. They accommodated many of our submissions. We made compromises, which made the decisions acceptable. But later on, they started to dig their heels in the ground. And they said, okay, make your inputs. And then the decision was what the ANC wanted. And then they wanted to prevent me and the National Party from criticizing such decisions, which we vehemently opposed in cabinet, to criticize it publicly. And that led to a very big fight.
You had a number of clashes with President Mandela in the Government of National Unity that on a couple of occasions almost caused you to withdraw from the GNU. Can you tell us about those clashes?
The main basis for those clashes was what I've already referred to, that I had to criticize as leader of the official opposition. I found it necessary to criticize. I found it my calling to criticize decisions against which I fought and where I lost the argument and couldn't reach a compromise in public. And the real clash started when Mr. Mandela made a speech. I can't remember even exactly what it was about. And I issued quite a harsh statement, rejecting what he was saying and opposing him, a public statement. We had a cabinet meeting, and I was attacked from all sides by cabinet ministers. I then started to explain what my problem was, and that the system cannot function if I, as the leader of the official opposition, and my party, doesn't have the right to criticize what we're against publicly. And actually I was, I think, swaying some of the ANC ministers who attacked me. And then as we were closing the item on the cabinet meeting, Mr. Mandela came in and he made a vicious attack on me, very personal. I took my ministers out of the cabinet and said, will you excuse us? We'll have to discuss this amongst us. And I said to my fellow cabinet ministers, I'm going to resign. We can't carry on like this. They persuaded me. Took them quite a long time. Not to resign, to stay in the room and to fight the good fight. We then tried to sort out a sort of an agreement with the ANC on this, but never succeeded.
Now, all the time that this was taking place, the Government of National Unity had started to function. National Assembly was sitting as a constituent assembly to draft the final constitution. Now, there were some important points that the National Party wanted to achieve in the final constitution. Can you tell us about those points, and particularly about the goal that the National Party had with regard to power sharing in the future? Because this had been one of the major promises that the National Party had made to its supporters.
Well, the difficult issues were education, mother tongue education, the protection of property rights, and a few other things. But on the issue of power sharing, when we signed off on the transitional constitution, we made it clear that although there's, in terms of it, only for 5 years a government of national unity, we would like the final constitution to build in some sort of consensus-seeking mechanism. And our final proposal was, if at the next election a party has a clear majority, it forms, as in any normal democracy, the government, and it rules the country. But there should be written in that there would also be a consultative council on which parties would have the same representation that were given in the government of national unity. 5% and above, and on a proportional basis, you get people, a party can appoint its people to this consultative council. The purpose would be that matters of national interest, such as the framework of the budget, but any other very important matter, should, before a decision is taken by any future government, should be referred to this consultative council in an effort to find consensus. If consensus would be reached, then that consensus would become the country's policy. If consensus was not reached, this consultative council would not have a veto. Then the governing party would implement its policies. They said no to this. I warned Mr. Mandela, I might leave the government of national unity if you say no to this. I instructed Roof, and he assures me he did it. He warned Mr. Ramaphosa, their main negotiator, that we might leave the government of national unity. They thought we were too attached to our long black cars and our red carpets and our official state homes, that we would not leave. And they said no. That caused the crisis. So the day after the final constitution was accepted, 2 years later in 1996, I called my people together and we had to take a decision. Do we stay or do we leave the GNU?
And that was the historic point at which the National Party left the government of national unity. FW de Klerk then went on to take up the role of leader of the official opposition. But during this following period, one of the main preoccupations would be the role of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which we will deal with in our next episode.